Hello, I'm Michael Depp, the editor of TVNewsCheck, and this week I am with Dr. Duane Varan, the CEO of MediaScience and Hark Connect, and we are talking TV. Talking TV is made possible by Making the Media, a podcast from Avid exploring the forces that shape the media, news, and entertainment business. The latest episode focuses on the streaming technology Secure Reliable Transport, or SRT. Host Craig Wilson interviews Peter Mogg from Haivision, the company which invented SRT. Mogg explains the background to the technology, the workflows it supports, the work they are doing in the cloud, and the future direction for SRT. Making the Media is available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor FM, and other podcast platforms. Welcome, Duane Varan.
It's great to be here.
Now, let me introduce you for those who don't know you. You are the CEO, as I said, at the top of MediaScience and Hark Connect. MediaScience conducts lab-based research counting almost every major US TV network, social media platform, and many global brands as clients. And Hark Connect is a qualitative research platform. So you've done research into advertising for TV, OTT, mobile. Your work has taken you into addressable advertising, brand integrations, and program context effects. I wanted to talk to you today to tap into what's coming over the horizon in terms of all of it and your latest insights into what audiences are looking for and what they'll tolerate in ad types. So let's dig into that a little bit. And let's start with OTT. It seems that NBCU has been developing some very new, interesting formats there, and we've seen some of them on this podcast before, talking about those units in the past. What are you seeing beyond with NBCU and beyond about what's emerging there in OTT?
Yeah, I mean, all of the commercial OTT platforms, I think, have a lot of really exciting and innovative ad units that are coming in. Certainly we used to live in a universe that was a one-trick pony. The 30-second commercial, and everybody had to fit their marketing problem into that one template. But as we go into the future, we're really going to be moving more and more into a universe of infinite possibilities. And we're still in the early era of that, starting to see people grapple with some of the new formats like branded pauses, picture-in-picture ads, choice ads like Hulu made popular all those years ago. Increasingly, we'll see more and more harnessing the power of interactivity in particular. But we have a long way to go. We're in infancy. These are very, very early days still, I think, in terms of the progress that we're making. And the challenge is that TV is a much more limited opportunity for interaction. It's not as easy to interact with as other devices. And so we're going to really have to kind of like move at the pace of the consumer with it, not move too fast in terms of a lot of the opportunities that we put before them.
Well, let's drill into that consumer pace a little bit more. How much are they willing to take, and how much elasticity does linear TV especially even have?
Yeah, I'll tell you about a project I did many moons ago. It was actually for the BBC. It was a very cool project. It was an interactive documentary, and it was a Vietnam War documentary that told the story from different perspectives. So you'd switch kind of like between perspectives. What we discovered in that study was that the key to increasing the interactivity was to actually tone down the interactivity. That you need to make it easy. You need to make it only when it's really relevant. The tendency is to try to tinker with it too much and try to get it to work too hard. And really you have to kind of like tone it back pretty aggressively. Certainly with the ad models, the things that have been rolling out are all at that minimal end of the spectrum. Things like a branded pause. I mean, people are going to pause anyway. So if they're seeing branding messaging happening at that time, it's no skin off their back in that sense. So those are the kinds of things I think that we're seeing in these early days with OTT.
What's the psychology behind that simplicity? Is it that people, excuse me, the TV is sort of laid back inherently, and so it's a whole passive medium, or is there something more to it than that?
I mean, it is a lean back medium, but it's also how you interact with your TV. Typically, you're not using your remote control. You're not using it like the way you would use your Sony PlayStation controller, right? So you're not kind of like in this interactive mode. It's not as natural to do as, say, swiping on your phone. You know, it has a lot of constraints inherent in the nature of the interaction itself, which means that, you know, you're only going to really be able to use your up, down, side arrow keys, an enter button, very, very, very few buttons. And you have to recognize the remote control is not in their hand. So you want them to do something, they've got to reach, get the remote control, and then interact with it. So when you're intersecting things that people are naturally doing, like you do, say, with the branded pause, you know, obviously that's going to be easier to do. But when you're demanding something of them that goes beyond that, then there's an extra challenge in there, and you've got to clip the ticket to kind of get them on board with it.
Mhm. So it seems in OTT that ad repetition is still a chronic problem. I mean, in my own anecdotal experience, I encounter it incessantly, and I'm looking at you, Peacock and Hulu. So where is the industry with that problem, and how are viewers like me, who get extremely frustrated to see the same State Farm ad for the umpteenth time during a program, where are we with any progress on that?
So I think there's a number of issues there. One is that, of course, OTT becomes more addressable. So that creates an opportunity. But I do agree with you. The idea of giving people the same ad over and over again is a mistake. In fact, we did a study where we tested the difference between only having an ad appear once versus having the ad appear 4 times during a 1-hour TV show. And this is a limited interruption model where you're not seeing lots of ads, but the ads that you're seeing are just repeating, right? And what we found was there was no added value for the advertiser in those repeat exposures. And where in a clutter environment, that might have worked because you maybe break through clutter. In a limited interruption environment, you get 0 value with those repeat exposures.
No
So
added value, but
it's
what about, is there a detrimental effect?
and there is a detrimental effect as well. Yes, it does increase the perception, you know, of people's ad intrusiveness perceptions and stuff. So no gain, a bad thing. The reason it happens though is because we trade in a very unsophisticated way. We're trading on GRPs. And so the publisher is getting the same value by basically having that go. And the other problem is that when you go addressable, you end up with a problem with inventory because you don't, unlike your traditional TV model where you have an abundance of inventory, suddenly in this universe where you're selling for a premium these targeted spots, now you don't have a lot of those spots. And so you're just repurposing the same one over and over again. When we tested, we had this one study that was really cool where we tested something like 42 new ad models with consumers, but we also tested it with media buyers. So we wanted to see what the trade-off was between the value to the advertiser and the value to the consumer. And the single most popular model in that mix for addressability was frequency capping. So what both media buyers and viewers want is they want frequency capping, but it's not what we're doing with our move to addressability. So it's what we should be doing as we move into addressability. We should be frequency capping, but we're not. So it does represent, I think, a cardinal sin that as an industry we're committing. It doesn't benefit anybody. It doesn't benefit the advertiser. It doesn't benefit the viewer. It's a lose-lose proposition.
I couldn't agree more there. You did some early research on short 6-second video ads. What are the latest insights into brevity, and where are tolerances or preferences falling there?
Well, so as a rule of thumb, what our research shows is that a 6-second ad delivers about 60% of the value of a 30. And by way of contrast, the 15-second ad delivers about 80% of the value of a 30. So that's disproportionately a lot of value. And the reason that that is so high is that much of the impact of an ad is actually delivered in its first 2 or 3 seconds. So people are being reminded of who the brand is very quickly. they make a go, no-go decision in that time period, and the ad will either have its effect or not have its effect, largely on the basis of that. And so and where those 6-second ads can be really powerful is as a reminder of something you've seen. So you might have seen a 30-second ad, and then if you see the 6-second ad, what's happening is it's playing out in your head, even though you're not seeing the full 6-second, the full 30 seconds. You kind of almost have a shorthand index of what it was, and so it's kind of jogging through those that memory activation for you. So 6-second ads do work. Of course, if you have a lot of 6-second ads, you have clutter. And what our research demonstrates is that too many 6-second ads spoil the soup. So, you definitely want to think about using it in very deliberate ways and smart ways, like, for example, during a game, the referees are conferring, have a 6-second ad pop up picture in picture. That's great real estate. So think about innovative ways of using the real estate rather than just thinking about them as substitutes, particularly with clutter, which I think would be problematic for that format.
So the 6-second ad sort of best needs a mothership to work. But you brought up picture in picture just now. That's something relatively new as well. How intrusive how are audiences reacting to that? It seems like a great use of space and time. However, does that have an irritating effect on audiences?
Well, not for many of the work we've done. We've always found that the picture-in-picture is a very effective ad unit. It doesn't have the same perception of being an ad, particularly because of the way the content is still accessible. So people don't mind it the same way they mind a normal ad break. And we know from the research that we've done, by the way, the first study that we did on this ad format was in 2009. So it's actually kind of new to the industry, but it was actually for Good Morning America for ABC. So they really kind of like pioneered it with that. But what we found was that, we find that it's got no adverse impact for the program. Of course, it delivers an ad impact, even though it's a smaller ad, because it's picture in picture. It's actually delivering an impact on par with a full screen, ad in a normal ad break. So it's a real win-win proposition. But like anything, you have to use it cautiously. Like you don't want to overdo the effect and undermine its efficacy. But certainly, as a general rule of thumb, it's a very effective model, more effective than a traditional ad, in fact.
There's not a detrimental effect by sort of just distraction of having two simultaneous images in the screen that doesn't have any adverse effect?
There is an art to it, for sure. A lot of the work that we've done has been about that nuance and getting the nuance right. If the screen is too big, it hurts the content. If the screen is too small, it hurts the ad. Locations matter. So there is an art to doing the picture-in-picture right, and there are things that you can do that get it wrong. But certainly as a whole, I think it's a very effective model.
So a little bit of a Goldilocks moment you have to have, but it can work.
Yeah, you are kind of like balancing interests, and so it's important to make sure that you do that effectively.
Mm-hmm. I mentioned program context effects in the intro, and that's where we look at how different program environments affect ads. So we've had a year and a half of COVID, social justice protests last year, an endlessly divided political climate. All of that informs every newscast every time. So what are you learning about how the news environment is impacting ads, both nationally and locally, given that it can be a very fraught viewing experience?
Yeah, people, these context transfer effects that you're talking about are actually incredibly complex. The market has a simplistic understanding of the way they work typically. Like they think it's about just, if it's a good environment, that's a good thing. And if it's a negative environment, that's a bad thing. It's actually not that simple. It's incredibly complex. We talk about 10 different types of context transfer effects, and they all work very differently. And typically what we see for news is, even though news may be going into negative content, overall, it's very activating of your cognitive resources. So when you go into news, your gears are kind of like in motion, and you're really thinking about what's going on and what you're hearing, much more than the rest of your TV viewing, your normal TV viewing experience, right? And what's happening with that is, because of the activation of those cognitive resources, you have better access to your memory pathways. So what we've been able to demonstrate is that, particularly for memory, ads that appear in the news environment benefit enormously. They actually outperform other content rather than underperform it. So advertisers are wrong when they think news is a bad environment. News is actually a superior environment for their content. When the content gets very negative, you actually get a different thing that starts to kick in, which is which is a mood repair effect. So what happens if the news story is negative, is that people go into the ad break wanting to restore their homeostasis, their sense of balance. And so the ad helps them in that task of restoring it. And so the ad actually over delivers, again, performs better than it would in other environments because of that hero effect that it has of delivering this value to the viewer. So there are a lot of really interesting things that we see that happen and that kick in with news content specifically.
How do you measure that? And when you're testing audiences, you're running that, like how is that something you are able to pinpoint?
Well, there's a lot of different ways that we test it, actually. There's a lot, I mean, what I synthesized for you is actually not one study, but many studies that we've done. We've done a lot of work around news. Since 2013, we've been doing this research for, the leading news networks. And some of it is looking at EEG research that we do, looking at, so for example, the mood repair stuff I told you about. We know that by looking at approach withdrawal in terms of looking at brainwave activity. So we're able to see that, other things being equal, when people are exposed to a negative news story, they go into the ad break with greater activation of their approach mechanisms. So that's an example of one way. We've done it also where to measure whether people's cognitive resources are activating. We did a really cool study where people went into ad breaks, watched content, whether news or prime time. So, drama, sitcoms, reality shows. And what happens is, instead of ads, they actually do little cognitive games, kind of like what you would see on lumosity.com. So one of those games is, for example, what's called the Stroop test, where you go in and you see a color on your screen. It's written out in a word. So the word is BLUE, but it appears in red ink. And you have to identify the correct color. Your gut says it's red, but if you think about it rationally, you will know that it's blue. And so we look at the response time for a correct response, and we then compare that when people are exposed to news content versus others, comedy, drama, reality, and we see that people have faster access to correctly identifying the color when they've been exposed to news content. So that's how we know that people have gone into the ad break with better activation of those, better access to their cognitive resources and their cognitive functions. And other tests like that, looking at galvanic skin response, heart rate data. I mean, all this data really informs the position that we've articulated around the superiority of news.
So your test subjects are pretty wired up as they're watching.
That's good. That's good. Yes.
Wow.
They're wired up. That's exactly right. Literally.
Yeah. So looking out, what do you see as the most significant ad trends that we'll all be seeing in the next year based on the research you're doing?
Well, I think that there are already a number of formats that are in market. The branded pause, the choice format, which Hulu did many years ago, but which many others are adopting. Limited interactivity, like simple response to offers, that kind of thing. Some of that we're seeing with QR codes. These are the kinds of things that I think are on the early horizon. On the farther horizon, from the research that I've done, I can tell you where I think the real fireworks are going to be is when we really get into more advanced forms of interactivity. We're not there as an industry. We have a long way to go because the skill sets aren't there yet in terms of how to build these. But when you go into the future, longer term future, there are really exciting opportunities around, interactive stories, ads that actually tell a story interactively, around interactive branded game experiences. I mean, what we can do potentially going into the future is actually incredibly exciting and incredibly effective, but we're still many steps behind in terms of getting there. So we have a way to go, I think, as an industry before we get to that level of interaction.
But now I'm intrigued. Can you paint a little bit more of a picture of what that interactive ad story might look like, and how complex is that?
Sure. Yeah, so we did a project for Nike many, many, many moons ago, and it was I made a critical mistake when I did the deal because it was a student project that I did. So I had a student team. So it was not, we didn't have a lot at stake in terms of the cost of it, because obviously it was a student team. But what we did is we said to Nike that we could deliver something that outperformed their linear ads. And they said, not a problem. If you can deliver, then we'll pay you. But if not, you don't get anything. We said, sure, not a problem. Well, we had no idea just how incredibly powerful a Nike ad really is and how little the room is. The ceiling effect is so strong. There's not actually a lot of room for improvement. So it was a massive task. It took 7 generations of testing to finally find a format that outperformed a Nike linear ad. But what we landed on was a full interactive story where you kind of like picked what happened next in the story, and really powerful. People want to experience it again. There was a lot we had to learn about how to tell that story. And this is what I was saying about how far we have to go in terms of the skill set. The ways that people have attempted to do interactive stories, have not been all that great. And in particular, they end up violating narrative structure in the process, which is not going to make it effective. So there are a lot of rules that we need to get through in terms of figuring out how to do it effectively. So that was the kind of thing that we had to do. Another example, Michael, to talk about an interactive game experience, we did a great project. It was called the Crest Celebrity Smile. It was an ad for toothpaste. The housewife is walking in the street, for the normal ad. Her teeth are so beautiful that people are snapping her photos everywhere because she's got such beautiful teeth. So she must be a celebrity. So then you click on the ad and you go into the Crest Celebrity Smile, which is a game where you see a face of a famous celebrity, but it's all pixelated. But the smile is crystal clear. And the faster you can tell us who that celebrity is, the more points you get as the face gradually starts to depixelate. So eventually you can see who it is. Well, it's a freaky thing. If you see Tom Cruise's smile, you instantly know that that's Tom Cruise. It's freaky. And so people can identify these people incredibly quickly. And what that does is it actually reinforces the fundamental premise underlying the entire ad, which is that your smile matters. And so what we saw, for example, in that case is we doubled purchase intention, which is massive. So these are just examples of what I'm talking about, where what we're doing is great, but what's on the long-term horizon is really going to be incredibly phenomenal once the market can develop the skills that are really necessary to delivering those effectively.
And once the television set or the remote control also seems to have to evolve, if you're consuming these kinds of ads in a linear fashion on a conventional television, it sounds like we're going to need some new, I don't know, more controls.
So the examples that I gave you were all very, very simple interaction. So it did not require anything like a PlayStation gaming experience, anything. They were just basically the arrow keys and the enter button. That's all you needed. So that's a central premise for us that that you have to build with that very limited toolbox.
Well, Dr. Duane Varan, I want to come over to your lab and look over your shoulder and have a look at what's going on.
You should come.
Come to Australia.
It's tons of fun.
And check this out, because this is fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Of course, our labs are in Chicago, New York, and Austin, so you don't have to go that far.
I'll go to any of them because this sounds like really, really good, interesting stuff. So don't be a stranger. Keep us abreast of your work, and thanks very much for talking with me.
Fantastic. Thanks again.
Cheers. A new episode of Talking TV is available most Fridays on TVNewsCheck.com. You can also listen and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and Spotify.